Welcome, everyone. I am chair of Sally DeCipio. I'm chair of the Global Women's Caucus for Democrats Abroad. We are super excited for this event. The topic is of supreme relevance, not just to all women around the world, but to everyone. At the GWC, we aim to tell the story about who wields power and how do we get it back. And it was in this spirit that we assembled this panel of incredible women. Without further ado, there's a lot to cover. I want to thank everyone for joining us for TRADWIVES Rebranding the Patriarchy. And with that, I'd like to introduce Karen Hofreiter, who is our head of events at Global Women's Caucus, who will be introducing our panel and moderating the conversation. There's a lot to cover. We'll try to get to your questions at the end. Please, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we will gather them for the end. Okay? I will be monitoring that chat. So, Karen, pass it to you.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel tonight. Thanks for joining us. Um, if you spend any time on Instagram or TikTok, you have seen the aesthetic. The linen sundresses, the sun-drenched kitchens, the homemade sourdough, and a soft-spoken narrative about returning to a simpler time. And on the surface, it looks like a completely harmless lifestyle choice. It's just a digital escape from the burnout of our modern day-to-day life. But if we peel back the filter, we find that it's a little more calculated and perhaps a little more sinister than that. And today we are here to connect the dots. So we are here to talk about how a sourdough starter becomes a gateway to Christian nationalism and how the TRADWIFE influencer has become the most effective marketing tool for Turning Point USA and the architects of Project 2026. And this is not just about who does the laundry. It is about a coordinated political movement that seeks to dismantle a century of progress for women, recodify domestic submission into law, and use the ideal nuclear family as a weapon against secular democracy. To help us map this pipeline from the kitchen to the Capitol, we have an absolutely incredible panel tonight. Y'all are in for a real treat. I'm going to start with introducing Anitza Templeton. Anitza, just give a little wave. Anitza is an advocate for women's autonomy. She is a social media personality and a former tradwife. And her work examines the real-world consequences of traditional gender roles, faith-based obedience culture, and the modern resurgence of the tradwife ideal. Our next panelist is Dr. Evian Leidig. Evian is an expert on online hate and radicalization, gender and misogyny, and threats to democracy. And her latest book is The Women of the Far Right, Social Media Influencers and Online Radicalization. And our third panelist tonight is Sarah Wiles. She is an activist and an influencer reclaiming the digital space to turn followers into voters and aesthetic into action. So, welcome, lovely women. I would like to open the discussion with a question about how the tradwife lifestyle movement uses softness and I guess so-called femininity to recruit women who are just exhausted and burned out by modern life. So I want to throw this first to Anitza. Um, Anitza, what initially appealed to you about the tradwife lifestyle? And could you name, like, was there a particular hook or something that really just grabbed you and kind of dragged you under, if I could say that?
It was the ideal life. Like I thought I was gonna live the beaver cleaver cookie cutter perfect life. And I thought it was safe. As a young girl, I was really scared to go into I have to figure out finances. I have to figure out how to buy a car. I have to figure that all out. And I thought this was shortcut to life where somebody else does all that messy stuff. And I just get to be pretty and like cook and stuff, you know? That was it.
And how did this aesthetic of being pretty and not having to do finances and well also just this idea of, oh, it's just so fun and it's soft and it's peaceful, and how did that compare to your actual day-to-day reality in your house?
Oh, I very quickly realized, like, oh, all those pretty parties and pretty decorations. I'm doing all of that. The reason the party starts at 7 is because I woke up at 4 a.m. to start cooking and decorating and cleaning and preparing. And by the time the party comes, my back hurts so bad. I have a raging headache. I can't think. I'm not even hungry anymore. And I don't even get to enjoy it. And that was like like the heartbreak moment of like, this isn't fun. This is fun for everybody else but me. This isn't what I signed up for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And kind of that's kind of a great metaphor probably for the treadwife lifestyle, because it looks like, oh wow, it's just fun. I play with the kids all day and everything. And anyone who has kids knows this is not how it works out at all. Um, and so actually I want to ask Evian here, does did your research that you did on this corroborate this? Like what Anita's saying, that it's not all it's cracked up to be. And particularly, how do you see this movement kind of weaponizing women's burnout there if they're working in a corporate job or modern capitalist society? How do you see them weaponizing this and in a wanting to move people to domesticity, like sell women on the idea?
Yeah, and before I answer that question, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Democrats Abroad for hosting this event. And it's great to see so many folks joining us from across the world who are all really interested in this topic. And thanks to Anitza and Sarah for joining today. I really want to learn from your experiences as we dive into this topic. So in terms of, yeah, my research into tradwives and into tradwife influencers, yeah, I think one of the biggest reason for their appeal is that oftentimes they proclaim, as Anitza had mentioned, this idea of trying to have it all in terms of a career and a family life. I mean, many tradwife influencers use that messaging and say, like, well, that's just too demanding. Right? Like, instead, let's sell this image of an escapist fantasy in which the home becomes this space of ease and contentment, and through these really pretty aesthetics and visuals that Anitza was talking about. But of course, it's a really superficial understanding of what is actually feminism, right? Because it's often latching onto like this girl boss feminism or this corporate feminism. And honestly, I don't know how many tradwife influencers have even read a book about
Yeah.
feminism, because if they did, they would know that, if you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, there were, for example, Black feminists who were trying to push for domestic labor as labor, right? And so there's a really complicated and nuanced history when it comes to feminism, but oftentimes tradwife influencers just latch onto a really superficial idea of a girl boss feminism, and then they flip the switch and say, like, well, now it's about promoting these heteronormative gender roles with women at home and their husbands in the workplace. And this is a really strategic move. I think that is something we all need to recognize here, right? Because it's like we can point to individual influencers or content creators and say, like, this is just them saying that that they're just making a choice to participate in a tradwife lifestyle. Well, feminism was never just about choice. It was so much more than that, right? And that's something we need to recognize. But I think this has really scary implications because a lot of tradwife influencers, they're basically saying that women shouldn't participate in public life. And when you have half of a population that's not participating in public life, you don't have, a true inclusive democratic society.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, speaking of that, Sarah, of influencers, you've actually kind of figured out how to flip the script and how to use kind of the exact same tactics that are being used by tradwife influencers, but obviously towards a much different message. Can you speak to how and why you think that this alternative message that you're providing is, lands, really hits well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're at a time in this kind of swing of this tradwife culture that we've seen, where wages are stagnant and it's almost impossible to be a single income family, especially if you have multiple children. And so, the reality maybe 5 years ago, this like you can, make your sourdough starter, which again, love a sourdough. I know folks in the chat were saying don't hate on the starter, the sourdough. It's not about the sourdough. It's about what it represents, right? And I think that there are so many women who lived into it and then went, hold on, exactly like Anita said before, like this is not what I signed up for and what I thought that this was. And so I think we're at a really pivotal time right now where if we can come in and say, hey, I hear you, right? Instead of you're an idiot and I can't believe you fell for that because that is not kind and also does not at all respect the very real frustrations and fear that women experience in day-to-day lives and why this would be such a attractive option to them. If we can instead go, hey, I see you, and your anger is valid, and your fear is valid, and your safety concerns are valid, and we now know, and you've seen with your own eyes, that doesn't work. So, what are we going to do with those feelings that you have? Well, we're going to empower you instead of disempower you. And I think when we can hit it straight on, sometimes I will take specific tradwife content and I will, as clear of a way as possible, but without shame. I try to say like, but babe, you're on a platform, on your own social media platform, probably making money, probably monetizing on this TikTok platform. And did you know that it's feminists that fought for your right to do that? Right. And so for me, it's so much less about speaking to the individual and more so just showing my audience, hey, you're going to see things over here, and here's another take on it. And I think that that works really well for folks because we are presenting it in a very grounded and truthful and fact-based way and showing them that staying in the kitchen and just working on sourdough doesn't actually make you safer. It's also not going to make your family any more money and make anything better in your life.
Yep. And actually, to that point, if we take a look at exactly what you said, how things are being presented. So, how are the tradwife movement, particularly, how they are presenting this lifestyle, and the language that goes into the presentation of that lifestyle. Um, I notice a lot of the language is really kind of masks the loss of female agency. So, Anitza, you could probably speak well to this. How is like, how do you think the idea of submission is rebranded so that it sounds like, oh, you actually do have agency. This is a choice for you, instead of what it really is, which is kind of winding back the clock a bit.
Yeah, they're glamorized. Like you see all the social media posts where the girls are like wiping the counter and saying, "This is what they're trying to keep me from," and they're
Yeah.
basically just creating a straw man argument of like, "Look at this big scary monster," when that's not what anyone is saying. What we're saying is this is dangerous to you. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's they're just they're yeah, making it a little cartoon, making it so silly, and it is a bigger issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's a lot of scary, scary stuff sitting behind this issue, particularly when you kind of move into the legislative aspects and the propaganda aspects that we're getting from Project 2026. Actually, Evian, so how do you find that how do you find they're using the tradwife aesthetic to soften the image of these more extreme policies that are happening? And that they're using kind of this tradwife avatar as, kind of a psychological tool for recruiting people into this movement and into this lifestyle.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the tradwife image is really such an effective psychological and marketing tool for what is a much more organized effort that we see. Um, Now, I think it is important for us to recognize that the ideas that tradwives promote is not new, right? So often, when I having studied the far right for several years, it's oftentimes like pouring old wine into new bottles, right? Like
Mhm.
the ideas are the same, but the way that messaging gets communicated is often new and often adapted to fit like contemporary contexts. And I think this is especially true when it comes to the use of visuals and aesthetics on social media. It's placed often within these ideas of culture and society, and so because it doesn't have that sort of hard bent political edge, it's often surpasses the radar of what people then might identify as like ideological or coded content. And it's precisely because a lot of tradwife influencers online, I mean, they code this through lifestyle content, as we've been discussing, right? Cooking, beauty blogging, motherhood and pregnancy, fitness, finance. Well, finance is a little bit more on the crypto bros side, but I mean, they talk about a lot self-improvement, especially. That's a really big one. And because a lot of this ideology gets coded through that lifestyle content, it also for followers seems like what these influencers are promoting is something that they see as being authentic, as relatable, as accessible to them, right? There's that type of like really intimate relationship that they build with their followers and with their audiences. Um, and so this is such a strategic move in terms of softening the image of much more extreme policies and ideas, but it's obviously been really effective, as we've seen.
Yeah, and Sarah, how kind of speaking of that, how do you handle, coming in there and trying not to be sort of the angry feminist, that you kind of also um I guess that, online we are supposed to be as women, palatable. We're supposed to be nice and quiet and not aggressive. And, we all know that. And the minute you start spewing feminist stuff, people go, oh, angry feminist. How do you avoid kind of falling into that trap?
Yeah. I'm very lucky in that, I only entered talking about these things in a more public way within the last year after this last election. I've always been, politically involved and come from a family of that. But I've run a small business for 8 years. And so, understanding how to speak to people online is something that I already knew how to do. But very early on in this work, I was introduced to the work of a woman named Jiggy Geronimo. And so much of what she talked about in how we move people to behavior change through our work online is by invoking very specific emotions. And there's three emotions. I'll walk everybody through them right now. But the very first one is anger. And part of
Mhm.
that is, what so much of the tradwife movement tries to do is remove these emotions that have been societally told to women that they are not allowed to have. We are not allowed to be angry. We are not allowed to be mad. We are not allowed to be fierce. We are not allowed to be powerful, right? And so, but we are all of those things. And more so, so many women are angry right now. So many women are seeing the full
Absolutely.
context and picture of what this is, whatever side of the political spectrum you fall on or don't fall anywhere in that a big like the pot is stirred right now, and for me invoking anger is honest because it's what people feel, but I don't let people stay. I mean, you can stay in whatever emotion you want to, but for me I want to move people beyond anger too, because if we sit there for too long we don't ever take action, right? We just sit and stew in our own anger. And so the three emotions that I was introduced to that are, in needed to evoke behavior change. And for me, the behavior change is I just want women to become more active, right? In creating change in this country, whatever that means. And there is no one right way to do that. So the first one is anger. The second one is hope. Hey, everything sucks. I hear you. You're not crazy. Everybody else is feeling this too, right? Like women have been so siloed. We have been told this tradwife movement is like, shh, back in the kitchen and don't tell anybody else that you're upset. Get back in there. You must not be doing it well. If you're upset and angry, that's a you problem, not a society problem, right? So then we're constantly looking at ourselves instead of looking at the truth of what is. So the second one is hope, right? Hey, yeah, you're angry. Things are really bad, but there's reason for hope. Look at Democrats abroad. Look at all of these women who care, who don't even live in this country anymore, and they're still fighting for you every day. Like, are you kidding? Do you see the hope? So we invoke anger, we invoke hope, and then we have to invoke solidarity. That's the last piece there, right? We have to invoke the community element because this is hard, right? But and I would be so curious to hear Anitza what you have to say about how you got yourself out of that. But I would assume that there has to be some community element because that's how behavior change happens, right? And so not only you're angry, but there's hope, and we're all doing this together. And for me, it's I start with anger because it's just truthful and honest, but I don't stay there. I move beyond it. And the people who are still angry at me for being angry aren't the people that are going to make change in this country anyway. So I'm just not so worried about them.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. Um, I want to actually pivot the conversation a little bit because I want to really take a moment to connect the dots between the tradwife lifestyle trend and the actual legislative goals that are of from the Christian nationalism, because that really seems to be what's driving behind us. And this is a whole scary topic. And Evian, this is actually kind of your wheelhouse here. So, could you talk a little bit about how organizations like Turning Point USA and the architects of Project 2026 benefit from the, I guess, organic popularity of tradwife influencers?
Yeah, I like how you said organic in quotes because that's exactly how we
Hmm.
should be approaching this issue. I mean, the way that I see all of this connected is that it's really all part of the same ecosystem. Um, Now, I mentioned earlier, like this is a strategic effort, and it's one in which we are influencing policy at the legislative level through the courts, as well as sort of on social media through culture war, commentary and discussions, right? Now, I should step back and say, like, when I had started doing the research for my book on this, I started in 2019. And like tradwife influencers, they weren't like, they were just kind of brewing in popularity. But I mean, tradwives themselves go back to like, I would say 2015 on mommy blogging forums and chat rooms and
Mhm.
stuff. But the influencer figure, like that really started to pick up during COVID. I think coincidentally, as people were spending more time at home, they were bored. They were looking for these types of like home activities. And it was, of course, an escapist fantasy. But I think over the last few years, we've started to see this massive growth when it comes to what I would say imperfectly womanosphere influencers, people who are sort of tradwives, but also like far right commentators who all sort of share these ideas of anti feminism, traditional gender roles, anti LGBTQ plus views. That's also super important here, and also for some like really extreme like white supremacist ideas. But the growth of these like influencers and creators, this is all really deeply connected to what we've been seeing for years behind Project 2025, as well as now Project 2026. And it's really popularizing the agenda around like natalism, so this using this fear mongering around falling birth rates, and sort of promoting the idea of having more children, white children I should say, and ones who are biological as well, and simultaneously restricting LGBTQ rights. But yeah, we're seeing how really specific legislative goals with Project 2026 are sort of weaponizing the figure of the tradwife and in platforming that as the ideal, and whether that be enacted through things like restricting reproductive rights, including access to hormonal birth control and fertility treatments, and just really promoting this idea of a traditional nuclear family unit as sort of the aspirational, like white American family.
And you said white, the white babies, white American family, um, and that leads to an interesting question. Like, do you see this movement kind of intersecting with white supremacy? Because the images that we see are almost exclusively white, cisgendered women and families. Do you think there's a connection there?
Yes. And I should also mention that, some of the most popular tradwife influencers are Mormon as well. And then there's a really long
Yes.
history of encouraging Mormon women to propagandize the Church of Latter-day Saints. Now, I should say that, not everybody who is like a tradwife is a white supremacist. And I would say most white supremacists advocate tradwifery. So there is some sort of distinctions here, but we definitely see really strong overlaps between like tradwives and white supremacy. But that's not a coincidence, right? Because I think what happens is oftentimes there's the elevation around similar ideas of like racial hierarchies, gender hierarchies, class hierarchies. I think as was discussed earlier, when it comes to like material conditions, right? And so what happens is white supremacists they utilize the tradwife image, and then they sort of instill their own political agenda on top of that. And oftentimes tradwives, because they are quote apolitical, because they don't talk about politics, even though they tend to reflect those political agendas in the content and propaganda that they disseminate. That said, I would actually really like to hear Anitsa's side of this story as somebody who was formerly involved in this lifestyle. What she thinks.
It's funny that you talk about that because I was a traditional wife before trad wife was a trend. And so that's why when I saw it, I was like, this is a trend and a hashtag. Wait, no, 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 no. This is the worst thing ever. Like, I'm trying to escape this. What do you mean this is like
Mm.
becoming a trend online? And it's wild now to hear about like Project 2025 and 20 because all those things were things that in my communities of real life trad wives I was fully bought into like, well, yeah, my husband should have the only vote for our family. He should get actually a vote for him, a vote for me, and a vote for each one of our children because that just makes the most sense. And like all the communities that I was hanging out with, all the like women's Bible studies and all that stuff that we were coming together, we were supporting all of these like Christian nationalist ideas. And it's funny, I even had in one like hangout session with like friends, I was kind of agreeing and going along with everything they were saying. And then one of them looked over at me and was like, you're not white, right? Because I'm actually Puerto Rican of Latin descent. So they were kind of like, you can be in on it with us, but like, you're not with us. And so it's wild to see it now, the trend online, because I'm like, this is so ugly. Like behind closed doors, this is so ugly.
And how, I know everyone would be really interested to know, how did you de-influence yourself from all of this and kind of like, can you talk maybe about, like, what was the starting point for that? What was like, the end point where you're like, mm-mm, done?
It was my children. I was thinking of my daughters and thinking of like because I realized I was in the same position my mother was in. And like it was that moment when you're a mom and you like realize, oh, I understand my mom. I understand everything she went through. But then I was also like, oh, it's because she was married and she had to do all the chores and all the laundry and all the traditional womanly things of the house. And that's a lot for one person to do when you grow your family. Like I just was like putting it all together. And then I just kind of walked back the thought and thought, well, I want different for my daughter. So I'm going to make sure I tell them different. And then I realized, well, children do as we do. They don't do as we say. So I could tell
Hmm.
them till I'm blue in the, but I'm going to have to show them the example. And right now, like my whole world came crashing down mentally because I just, was having an honest moment with myself. Like, am I really happy and would I wish this for my children? And when the answer was no, I was like, well, now I have to fix a few things. And so, yeah.
And that then started it. And so from this experience, I mean, I'm sure everyone, I saw this video on YouTube that was a recap of, I believe it was Turning Point USA, and it was a pronatalist convention or something crazy like that. And she, there were a lot of very, very young women there. And so what would you say as a former tradwife? What is the one big point or the one big thing you would like to say to young women who are maybe dabbling in this or playing with the idea or thinking about it? Like, what would you like to say to them?
Um, there's always like two lines of thinking that I want them to walk and like fully walk all the way to the end of what that decision means. One of them is like, don't you have hobbies and like dreams and desire? Like Ballerina Farm is one that I think of that with like such heartbreak. Like it doesn't matter that you get to like practice ballerina with your daughters. You know you had more inside your heart. And you know you could have done so much more with the talent that you had and still have inside. And you chose to put all that aside to raise children. And that's not a bad thing, but we are made for more. You know what I mean? If women were only meant, if our only purpose was to birth children and to serve men, why do we not die at the end of our fertility? Why do we enter a stage of
Yeah.
menopause where we can now
Mhm.
share our wisdom and everything that we have inside? Because it doesn't matter if you had children. It matters that you lived a life well lived to be able to pass on wisdom. And some of the most valuable wisdom my children have received and that have really struck their hearts has been from the child-free women that I have as friends that have been able to speak into their life because they have different experiences than I do as just their mom, you know? Um, and then the other line of thinking I always want them to think is like could you imagine? Like I want you for 1 week to just cook and clean and do nothing. Like just do not like, like walk the path of living your dreams and then walk the path of not living your dreams. Go to
Yeah.
the end of your life and like what award do you get at the end of your life for that? What do you get? You what have your children seen from you? Because a lot of women go into the tradwife life because they want to be a mother. You're not doing a lot of mothering. You're doing a lot of cooking and cleaning and shushing and
Mhm.
scooting your children away because I have my womanly tasks to do. You know what I mean? So do you want to be a mother or do you want to cook and clean and do all this dirty work?
Yeah, absolutely. And really well said. And like Evian, so we have, the personal lived experience and Evian from your side, more from I guess, the political academic side of things. What would you say might be, what would be the most effective way to de-influence someone who's starting to move in this direction or already has, been involved in the movement?
Yeah, so I mean, one very important thing that I would emphasize here is really teaching people how to spot the signs of manipulation. Because oftentimes these
Hmm.
tradwife influencers, they are monetizing off of your vulnerability, right? It is an attention economy online. And they're seizing upon people's fears and insecurities, and then they're weaponizing off of it, and they're profiting off of it. So I think being able to spot the signs of manipulation, as well as how that goes hand in hand with critical thinking and digital literacy online, is super important. Actually, something I did write about in my book as well were the roles of like influencers like Sarah, who were like really present in helping to debunk a lot of these talking points as well. And that was still like emerging when I was writing my book, but I'm seeing more creators like Sarah who are really steadfast in doing that work online. So I'm really, I think it's great that you're here on the panel with us, Sarah. But and then the final thing that I would think about in terms of like an effective way to de-influence someone is, it's also not, the burden shouldn't just be on the individual either, right? I think we need to step back and think about like, the role that society plays at large here, and recognize that this is a myth, the tradwife life that sells. And it sells because unfortunately we are experiencing a generational amnesia when it comes to the advances of feminism and women's rights, and the lack of education about feminism in younger generations. Again, like I talked earlier, a lot of these tradwife influencers are using a really superficial understanding of feminism. Now, for those folks who may not know what general amnesia is, it's often a term that like climate change scientists used to refer to this idea that over several different life stages, we will see, for example, a species become endangered and then extinct, but each new generation recognizes that new baseline as something that's normal. So, to the extent that over several
Mhm.
generations, we'll see like an animal species become extinct. I think that's a really good concept to think about feminism as well and not take for granted the advances of feminism and women's rights, and to educate new generations about the importance of these movements, and also recognize that life was not great for women and for minorities, quote, back in the day, right? Like there was very real struggles there that were had. And that still is the case today within certain communities, that I think Anitza spoke about, when it came to her personal experience within the tradwife lifestyle.
So, Sarah, how then are we going to get women to go from scrolling for lifestyle tips to running to the ballot box as fast as possible?
I'm so glad that you asked. I grew up in a family where we're very split politically. Most of my family has the same feelings that I do, but many of us don't. And I think part of what has been so easy for me to speak about these topics online is because it was normal for me to be speaking about these topics at the dinner table. So for me, and it's normal for me to speak about these topics with my friends, but I can also recognize that that's not the truth for many people's lives, especially right now. And so what I try to do, in the same way that Anitza said, I can tell my girls to not do this, but people actually learn by people's actions, not from what we tell them to do. I think that that is where, there's a lot of damage that has been done by social media and influencer culture too. And I have been saying recently, I think the thing that kind of damned us might be the thing that saves us too, because people like me and the work that I do, we have an opportunity to socialize this and explain that this is part of our lives now. This is just who I am day to day. I'm constantly immersed in these things, and I know that I'm immersed, and everybody on this panel is immersed at a deeper level than most people are, and that's okay. It doesn't have to take over your whole life. But I want to make it so that, women are as involved in civic life, and it's a normal part of what we do, just like when we talk about the fact that it's raining outside or you got a new pair of shoes, right? Like, oh, and did you know Emily Gregory is running for House District 87? I'm canvassing for her this weekend. Do you want to come? We can talk about anything while we go out canvassing, right? And I think that the thing that I keep saying online, is no one is coming to save us but us, right? Like if we wait on the politicians to change, we're going to be waiting forever. Because if we look at every major historical event, every big, social push that we've had in the United States, when we look at women's rights, when we look at civil rights, we look at all of these things, LGBTQ rights, these things didn't happen because the politicians one day decided to be kind and find a
Hmm.
moral backbone and go, you know what? You're right. We were assholes and we'd like to be better now. Right. No, it's never that. It is everyday citizens standing up to these people and saying, this is wrong and I demand better. Right. And I think part of the beautiful part of that is there's people that are going to be on the front lines in a million different ways, but movements require women at every level. And they require women who can volunteer babysitting hours and cook a meal for community organizers and handle the spreadsheets in the back end, right? Not everybody is going to be there with a protest sign, but all of us need to be involved somehow. And so my goal in what I do is to socialize that and normalize that and show people that this is just part of who we are now if we want change.
Hmm. And so, what is the first step, I suppose, in branding the resistance, right? And maybe specifically for people who want to use their social media platforms. Although I want to really highlight what you said because I've heard you say this before and I love it, that you know what, maybe you don't have a social media platform, maybe you're terrified of getting on the phone or knocking on doors. But you can you type really fast. So you can write email templates or you can be filling out data sheets. There is so much work that goes into even just having a social media platform. Like I I know some of the people who support you, Sarah, and they're wonderful, and they're also, really putting in an effort because there's a whole lot of work behind the scenes. Um, but for people who have platforms or want to use the social media, even if it's just like 500 followers or 100 followers, what's like the first step?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beautiful part of what you said is like it's everyone's comfort level, and our comfort level changes over time. And so I think sometimes when we look at this work, we look at going from, 0 to 100, right? So it's like I don't say anything online, so I'll go be Sarah, right? And it's like it's probably not going to happen like that for most people. Most of us don't do things, like that. Some of us do because we're a little crazy, but so like share one story, amplify one post about something that you care about. And I think the most important part here is that people get so overwhelmed, and I get so overwhelmed at the onslaught of horror that's coming at us daily. If we just keep taking that in and not doing anything with it, first of all, it's going to crush your soul, and second of all, it's going to make it so that you have nothing to share because you're so overwhelmed. This administration is intentional about the way that they are doing these things because it overwhelms us, because it keeps us stuck. So, what I say to people who are getting into this is pick one cause, just one that you care about. Yes, they are all valid. Yes, they are all important. But if you pick one lane, right? And then you narrow your focus into that lane and you go follow 3 accounts or 4 accounts or 5 accounts that are speaking specifically to that issue, then you can be the person that speaks about that issue. And it's going to make it so that you are less overwhelmed. And it's also going to make it so that if you're the person that shares those stories, you don't realize the power of amplifying content has. If we're talking about Instagram, because that's my main platform, right? Or Facebook, wherever it is, just sharing other people's stories to your Instagram or your Facebook is going to signal to the people that already know you that you're a safe place to land. And they might then reach out to you and say, what do you think about this upcoming election? Or who are you voting
Mhm.
for? Or how do I get involved? Or aren't you scared? Don't you think that people are going to come at you? Right? And it opens up those conversations. And so start small, find one thing that you care about, and just start by amplifying those messages. And that is enough to start with. And then see how you feel and see if you want to add more on.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I want to thank our entire panel. And I don't want to take up too much more time because I bet the audience has a lot of questions that they like to ask. But again, thank you, Sarah, Anita, Evian. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you guys and having this conversation with you. So, Sally, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Really, really provocative conversations. There's a lot of questions. I'm going to start with one that wasn't one of the first, but it's really something that's crossed my mind. I'm so acutely aware of how, as many of us are, how organized they are, right? They've outplayed us for decades. And someone brought up in a very personal way concern about her nieces, just as an example, that the governor of Nebraska, which is her state, just announced a partnership with Turning Point USA for the high schools. Someone else right after Suzanne said there's already 3,300 chapters of Turning Point USA in USA in high schools. How, like doing the individual work, absolutely. But is there a larger, what do any of you know of any higher level organization and organizing that's going on that people can A, tap and B, support? And if not, how do we do that? Yeah, Sarah.
So I think it's always going to look different on our side, right? The right, by and large, just buys into any mentality, right? I think this is kind of, and please, Evian, if you disagree with any of this, you have the academic background to tell me what I'm saying is not true. But the way that I see it is the right is really aligned, right? We are just now starting to see cracks, and it's cracks because the horror is so horrific that even people who are aligned with it are going, hold on. We don't look the same, right? So like they've got Turning Point USA, and Turning Point USA kind of calls the shots everywhere. So on our side, we're like, well, who's the Turning Point USA? And we don't look like that. And we're never gonna look like that because we are a much different party and we have much different goals. And so there are going to be smaller organizations. Red, Wine, and Blue is a really great one. They've got chapters all around the country. One of their main goals was to out chapter the number of Moms for Liberty chapters. Moms for Liberty was a group a couple of years years ago. They're not gaining steam anymore, but was doing a lot of this school board work. And so, look for red, wine, and blue, see if there's a chapter near you, but there are going to be smaller organizations on the ground at every level that's fighting this. It's just not going to look like as big as a Turning Point USA because that's just kind of not who we are.
Evian, do you want to add to that?
I think Sarah covered it super well. So yeah, no disagreement there. And I think it is important for us to realize just how much the conservative movement has been investing heavily in young people as well as women. Um, but I think Sarah's right in terms of like, we're fighting against an unlevel playing field, right? Like even if you look at social media platforms, right? Those are often, spaces where we see the algorithms being captured by the right? So should we really think about, for example, like trying to play when the cards are dealt against us in that way? But I don't have specific organizations. I think the ones that Sarah mentioned are great. And yeah, I would just like to point out that, like, when we think about the arena of politics, we can think about it at a legislative way, but we can also think about it much more creatively and also like tech spaces, culture, just yeah, other types of lifestyle as well.
Um, okay. So wait. All right. Well, the algorithms being what they are, it feels like we're stuck increasingly in echo chambers, which we all know. This particular person, Melissa, said, "My algorithm only delivers me tradwife satire." I would assume the genuine tradwives are continually having their worldviews reinforced. So basically, the polarization is reinforced at every move. How do you even get the attention of people outside your algorithm?
So this is really cool. There's some movements that are happening right now inside of creator spaces where there's a specific focus on people doing more culture forward content. I am not one of those people, but there are lots of folks in there that are kind of infiltrating those spaces and in a very calm and much more undercover way are coming into those spaces and doing the types of content that you would see these tradwives do. They're making the sourdough, they're wiping down the table, they're with the kids, but they're sharing different information. So that is happening. It's going to take a while, right? This didn't get built overnight, and it's not going to, get disassembled overnight. But I think the bigger thing that we have to remember is that families are suffering so much in the United States right now, and so it is becoming increasingly harder and harder to spin this narrative, right? Now that we have, one party is in control of all three branches of government right now, it's on them. They have all the power, and yet the eggs are more expensive, the gas is more expensive, right? And so that is really, in a horrific way, helpful for the counter narrative here because what they are selling, right? Before, when they were selling this narrative, it was vote for this guy and he's going to bring this to you. Well, everybody voted for this guy, and now we're in war, and the gas is expensive, and the eggs are through the roof, right? And so, yes, there's a part of it where it's like we are having to infiltrate those spaces, but the truth and the reality of what is, we saw young men go for Trump in scary numbers, and they are already changing their mind. All of the polling that's coming out is showing that they are very quick to be like, we came in here because you told us something was going to be true, and it's not. We're not idiots. So I think, I think there's a lot at play there, but the missteps of this administration are actually really helpful for our movement, sadly.
And actually,
Anita,
I think Anita, you had something to
yeah.
say to add to that question too, right?
Yeah, well, I was just going to kind of point back to what Sarah said earlier about like when everybody shares even just one little point or one little topic, that helps spread the word on social media because you never know. You always think all of the people that you follow are thinking exactly like you, following all the same exact accounts as you, and they're not. There are so many weird pockets on social media. And so to change your own algorithm, it does help when just the regular people on social media, like you're not a content creator, you're literally just a person who likes to scroll. When you share, like, oh, you know what, this one topic is important to me, I'm going to post this article. I'm going to repost it to my stories. I'm going to repost it on my TikTok. It does give it wider spread and it does help change your algorithm because you're kind of forcing it as somebody who they follow, who you interact with. So,
Um, I have a question. So we know Project 20, we were all obsessed, those of us who were paying attention, with Project 2025 last year. And so it was, even though we saw it was on the horizon, I think it was shocking to discover how quickly they were able to enact it. So now we are all becoming aware of Project 2026. How worried should, well, for those of us who aren't as familiar with Project 2026, can someone please do a high level what it is and how worried should we be? Evian, are you,
I
or
nominate.
uh, yes, that's Evian, or can you speak to that?
I could speak to sort of my elementary understanding of it, which was just essentially like the next phase of what was the building blocks of 2025. I think interestingly, it is in some ways sort of a condensed and more targeted agenda compared to what was it, like the 400 pages that we saw with Project 2025. But there is actually a really specific section in Project 2026 which focuses on the family life, which I think is really relevant for our conversation here. And it's really steeped in this in this wording about how like every child deserves to be born to a married mother and father, and it talks about like the sanctity of the family unit, and it's really steeped in this kind of like I mean basically what we've been discussing so far, but it also puts at the forefront, what the Heritage Foundation envisions as particular policies to advance at like the state and federal level to quote restore the nuclear family to the center of American life. Um, and I think I saw some people in the chat here actually talk about like how present is like the tradwife phenomenon in other countries. So I thought maybe I could actually speak to that because it relates here to Project 2026 actually. So I live in the Netherlands. I saw a lot of folks here living in Europe joining our call today. And what has been really interesting is how much Project 2026 has been emulating what's been happening with far right political parties in Europe. So if we look at countries like Meloni's Italy or Orban's Hungary, who have tried to instill these pro-family policies, they've also been initiating things like providing like no income tax for women who have more than two children, for example, providing a 7-seat family car for families of 3 children plus, right? There's been all these like initiatives try to encourage more, quote, pro family, that is, heteronormative nuclear families. What's interesting is that after several years of this, it actually hasn't worked. Like Hungary's birth rate has actually not gone up, which has been really interesting. And now Orban is facing an election in which he actually has faced a really strong opposition because people are fed up. They're like, the price of living is too high, inflation is too high, like, your policies have not worked. And so I think like reality is starting to kick in, the glass is shattering, and people are starting to see that this is actually just a farce when it comes to the agenda. And so sorry, that was sort of a long way around Project 2026, but I wanted to just to communicate this fact, like this is a model that is being built upon other models that are actually failing in practice, and that is the weaknesses that we can pinpoint moving forward.
There is a question from a 20-something who said, I've been fortunate to find an amazing feminist partner, but most of my friends struggle to find left-leaning, feminist, supportive men in their 20s in the current dating market. We know that this is true all over the world, even though this is a woman who lives abroad. Do the panelists have any advice for the young straight women trying to date men in a generation where genders are more politically divided than ever? Raise your hand. I'm sure you all have something to say about that.
I think the quickest way that they're going to find peace is instead of like, I hope this doesn't feel like a non-answer, but instead of focusing on dating, focus on decentering men and decentering romantic relationships. Like, there's so much more to life than having a romantic partner, and there is companionship in so many other ways. And romance is kind of something that's like made up in movies. So instead of trying, I would always be super firm on what you believe in and no, not wavering. You have to go into, because literally the red pill movement is teaching the men to go on dating sites, be very ambiguous about your beliefs, wait until you're hooked in, and then just try to convert her to your red pill. And it happens. So you have to, if you're that like, like, dating people, be super firm in what you believe in and also realize that like dating and romance is not the end all. There's so many types of love. You can find so many different types of love. That's not the only thing there is out there. So I hope it doesn't feel like a non-answer.
It's a good answer to me, but I'm a cynic. Anybody else want to add to that? Because I think it's a really important question as we're becoming as aware as we are about the tradwife woman and sort of the general hate against women is come like it's exploded. We try to center it around Jeffrey Epstein, but any woman knows this is so much bigger. It preceded Jeffrey Epstein and it will outlast Epstein. Um, um, what we're finding though, it feels like is this, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about how they're sucking in young men, which I find very, very alarming. So how, like, I'm post dating, I've been married. I don't have this problem. So it's real easy for me to support Anita, everything that you're saying. But this is a real problem for us as humans, that the polarization is not just between right, left, but it's between genders and all genders. And is the answer that women should continue to work on themselves and empowering themselves because we know we have tremendous power. And I say that with all respect to all the non-women on this call. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
I mean, if this is a conversation that y'all want to have, I have some men who can speak very eloquently about this topic, and they can speak to it from the male perspective. When I talk about women who are infiltrating the tradwife spaces, there are men doing the exact same thing in the manosphere spaces, and the work that they're doing is absolutely incredible. Um, I can speak as I'm not in my 20s. I'm gonna turn 40, and I've been married for 16 years. But what I can tell you for sure is that my husband and I don't always see eye to eye on things, and part of that is because we have two lived experiences in this world. Just as much as the patriarchy harms women, the patriarchy harms men horribly. The reason, if we think about this, right, like the reason why the tradwife movement is such a attractive place to land is the same reason why the red pill movement is such an attractive place to land, right? Like, and so I try to when I'm having a good day and I've got my compassion and my empathy at 100%. I don't always have those days. I think about it through the lens of, I think so many women have been doing work on themselves for a very many number of years, and the men are lagging behind. And so the contrast between us continues. And so I take it as my responsibility to educate the men in my life. That doesn't mean that it should be any other woman's responsibility to that, but for me, I can see how much the men have been harmed, and how if I can have those conversations with the men in my life, including my 10-year-old son, including my 42-year-old husband, including my 70-something-year-old dad, then that starts to make change too. And so, I think for women who are dating, if you are, and if this is something that's in your capacity, have those conversations, right? Like have them up front. I love what Anita said, like be who you are, come to the table as who you are. And if they want to have that conversation, then see if you can question it. Like, this is what I believe. Okay, why? Oh, because my dad told me that, or that's how I grew up. Okay, cool. Did you know this information? Right? So often, actually all of the time, these beliefs are informed by false narratives. They're not informed by fact at all. And so if we can speak to history, if we can speak to fact, then we can start to change hearts and minds. But that is also a really big requirement to be putting on women right now, who are already at the max of all of our unpaid labor and all of our paid labor that isn't paid as much as men. And we're really freaking taxed emotionally right now. So I'm not saying that is the answer. For me, it has just been my answer to this.
I want to, does anyone have any last words? Evian,
Um,
Anita? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to add on to this conversation that we're having because I'm not sure if folks saw this, but there was a really interesting study published in The Guardian recently where they found that across the world, Gen Z men were much, much more conservative than boomers, which was fascinating to see. But there was really like two key points in there that I thought are promising for us. So the first is that 41% of all the men surveyed thought that women should not appear too independent or self sufficient. But Gen Z males were the most likely to believe women who have a successful career were more attracted to men. So I mean, it's sort of like you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? They younger men, I mean, they do see ambitious and career driven women as something that is attractive. But then at the same time, they're sort of they feel like, well, maybe she shouldn't, be so aspirational. But I think that is a point that we can turn when it comes to how young men view their relationships with women. And also they found in the study that there was a big gap between what people personally thought about gender roles in the home and what they thought society expected of them. Right. So there's also this kind of like dissonance with what they're seeing online versus what they actually feel. And I think that is another point that we can really work on in terms of like trying to have those really productive and fruitful conversations with young men. And again, going back to, being able to spot signs of manipulation, signs of a vulnerability, because unfortunately, what we're seeing here is how a crisis of masculinity has become a crisis of misogyny, right? And that is something that has been weaponized so effectively.
This is such a big topic. By the way, we've like veered into something that is so top of mind, I think, for women around the world of all generations. I know I talk about this a lot, and I know it really informs the work we're doing at the caucus. I think I so deeply believe in empowering women and helping women. It's the age-old helping women realize their power. And I feel listening to the three of you speaking and thinking out loud and seeing a lot of these questions, I conclude again that it's the same thing we've always been fighting for, and that it's just more urgent to do it. And I think that women are really women did it in the 60s, but it was a very rarefied group. It was more niche, and it feels like it's spreading um, more deeply and really being embraced. And I know just from the responses that we get, when we write newsletters or we have events, and it's really it powers me to continue doing the work. And I hope that for everyone who's here, women, like let's just do it. We have to. I had a conversation the other day with someone who is a man. It was at dinner. I was with a few people, and this man said, everybody hates feminists. And I was like, I didn't know, do I ruin the conversation right now? I was like, what? And like that's going on. It's not just young men who are being red pilled, and it's not just millennials, and it's everyone. It's systemic. And again, I really value the men who are on here on this call and care enough to be here. I really, I'm like, it's very powerful, and I appreciate you, but I really appreciate the women. Just want to say, all of you, every single one of you. So, we've been putting, I guess we have some slides before I let anyone go. Okay. I really want to make the appeal. Join the caucus. Who is everybody? What does that mean?
That when the person said everybody hates feminists, that was just, I always just question them. So instead of
Well,
fighting
they
them,
don't know what the word means.
everybody, right? But then you catch them in it. Then you really
Yeah,
make them
yeah,
look
yeah, yeah, yeah,
all
yeah,
over their shit, and then they get stuck.
yeah,
That's my trick. Ask them questions.
yep, 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 yep. Yeah, I'm bad at that. But you're totally right. Yeah. It's like still learning that one. Before anyone goes, request your ballot. All you people who are living abroad, can we post links again, please. Okay, so request your ballot, vote from abroad. Please go. If you need help, you can reach out to, there's many people who are trained. You can either, there's a link on the website that you can make an appointment with someone one-on-one or reach out to us at the Women's Caucus. There's many of us who are trained. The SAVE Act. For those of you who don't know about the SAVE Act, it's designed to disenfranchise. That's just a full stop. It's designed to disenfranchise women who have gotten divorced and have to change their name and get a new passport. It disenfranchises older people who lost, have to show proof of who they are. It really disenfranchises people living abroad. What they're hoping to do is make it that many of the states make it that you have to go in person and request your ballot at your election office. So please, yes, it is essentially a poll tax. Please call your senator. We've just posted a link, Democrats Abroad, tell your senators, this will direct you how to do it. Grab the link and join the Women's Caucus. We're having a lot of fun, believe it or not, with all this crazy work. We actually have a lot of ideas going on for organizing. And grab our, thank you, Michelle, grab our link tree, join our social, please follow us on social media. The panelists all posted their links. You could scroll up and grab them if you haven't. And please volunteer with us. And finally, Democrats Abroad is a volunteer organization, all volunteers. We work our butts off to get out the vote. It actually costs money, so please consider donating. There's no amount that's too small. And with that, I really want to thank all of our panelists, thank everyone for coming. I'm grateful to every single one of you. It's been really a pleasure to get to know you all. And thank you, Karen. Thank you. Is chat going to be saved? I think so. All right. Thanks to all. We're going to sign off. Thank you. Grazie mille. Ciao, ciao.